Welcome. It's Friday. It's time for some live office hours with me, Dr. Shannon Coates. I'm a singer, I'm an educator, and a pedagogy maximizer. In other words, I develop resources and classes and practicums and blah, 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 all that stuff for voice teachers. So we can be better educated about teaching, just like how to teach. And of course, how to teach singing, how to work with singers, for sure, but like how to teach. So that's what I do. To that end, I do some live office hours like this on topics that come up in either that I've noticed that people have asked about, that people in other courses or other things that I'm doing ask about, and maybe we don't have time to go into it, and whatever the thing is that we're working on. Or maybe something comes up in, say, I'm working in a lesson, or I'm doing a consult, or in one of my classes or courses, something comes up that I think, oh, that's genius. I think the whole world should know about that. And so I talk about it here. So there are lots of things that sort of come up, and in the voice ped degree, for example, this is well, it's probably going to be about 10 months this coming class versus 8. I've expanded some things, so it'll be about 10 months in terms of time. The voice ped degree, that is 10 months us together in a cohort practicing pedagogic principles, deconstructing some of the things we understand and believe about teaching, and then allowing for values-led pedagogy to come through, practicing that, which is amazing and super fun. The next cohort will start in January. So if that is something you're interested in, please let me know. I've decided to bring back pop-up voice ped classes. So those of you who may remember back to like 2020, I was doing sort of pop-up voice ped classes versus the actual lectures that I do now. So now the classes are like big things that, you know, they're like 90 minutes, they're like a series, I've got workbooks, I've got the blah, 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 like they're fancy. And then those classes end up in the library. And like I said, I haven't done in a long time are pop-up voice ped classes. These are super quick little 60 minutes, $60, get in there, get out. So what we're talking about today, warm-ups. That's what we are talking about. What I want to do here in the live office hours is to do a little bit of talking through reason when we are working in a student-led, student-centered pedagogical model. So when we are truly invested in working in that pedagogical model, we no longer ask the question, should singers warm up? That question goes right out the window because it's actually the wrong question. And so I want to just talk today about why it's the wrong question when we're working within that student-led or student-centered pedagogical model, why it's the wrong question, and also why I reject the premise of the question to begin with. And here's the thing, we see this all the time on the forums. You must warm up so that you don't injure yourself and so that you can sing to the best of your ability because science says that you must do this, right? And then on the other side of that, we get lots of voice educators out there saying, no, you don't have to warm up if you've spoken during the day, you don't have to warm up, blah, blah, blah. We get both sides of that story. Often the folks who are on that side of the like, you must warm up or you should warm up, or if you don't warm up, there will be dire consequences. You're not doing yourself any favor because science on that side. Often those folks are coming from often they're coming from the SLP side of things. They're coming from a more medical model, diagnose and prescribe side of things. And so there's this understanding of like science says, and therefore we must, and it is my job to make sure that you do, or else you might injure yourself, right? So we get this sort of like top-down prescriptive diagnosis and prescribe kind of model coming through in the pedagogy. So the pedagogy then becomes prescriptive. This really strays outside of student-led and outside of student-centered pedagogy, even when we have the best of intentions. Obviously we're doing this because we have the best of intentions, right? We're like, but I don't want the singers I work with to be injured. I want the singers I work with to know that they have to, how to take care of their voice and how to sing to the best of their ability, right? This is the best of intentions, and also science says. And then on the other side, we've got folks who are like, yeah, but, and I am one of those folks who have done live office hours before, talking about why I don't do warm-ups in my lessons. And if very often, the people who observe me teaching or who I work with when we're teaching, very often will be like, I noticed you didn't do any warm-ups with the singer. I'm like, oh, you noticed that, did you? And it's not because I'm like, I expect you to warm up before you come. That's not what that's about. There's a whole other side that is like the other side of things that says, well, if you've been singing, or if you've used your voice, especially in a typical independent voice studio where the singers I'm working with often have just come from school or their job where they've been talking, their voice is warmed up. Everything that needs to happen in order for them to create sound, that's there. It's done. We're already done, right? So do we need to do more warm-ups to get the voice ready? No, we do not. That's the two sides. And I have been very firmly on this other side of things for quite a long time. And the last couple of years, I have moved away from that part of like, well, you don't need to warm up and we shouldn't be blah, blah, blah. I've moved away from that into what feels to me like an even more student-centered, student-led pedagogical framework, or that is more in alignment to the way of working that is more in line with the student-led pedagogical framework, which is, I don't accept the premise of the question, you must warm up because otherwise you will hurt yourself or you're, doing yourself a disservice, and or you already are warmed up enough because you've been singing or you've been using your voice, right? Those are two sides of the same question, which is, should you warm up or not? And I don't accept the premise of that question, which, should you warm up or not? Because I think the question is, what does your body need right now in order to do the singing that you want to do in this session? And what does your body need to do in order to get to that place? And how will you know when you are there? How will you know when you're ready to sing in the way that you want to sing? How will you know that your body is ready to do the thing it wants to do, you want to do, it's most efficient, most effective, etc.? How will you know when you're ready to do that? And so then my role as the teacher becomes supporting singers to figure that out. My role is neither to tell you that you need to warm up for your own good and then tell you what exercises you're supposed to do, or you don't need to warm up because you've already been speaking today and so you're fine. It's neither one of those. So the side of like science, right, that says you must warm up or else. You must warm up. We get on our high horse about that. Again, I don't accept the premise. The premise is either you must warm up because science, or no, you must not warm up. So the reason that I initially have been very meh on the you must warm up side of things is because, first of all, when we tell people that they must warm up or else, we are saying something that the science does not say. The science is not prescriptive. Data is not prescriptive. Data does not tell us what to do. Data does not tell us or else. Data gives us options so we can make choices. That's what science does. Gives us choices. So when we say, science says that when you warm up, you will prevent injury, we are going way out of what the science says. The science says that some kinds of what we would consider a warm-up or voice use will help to recalibrate and or balance some of the ways that we use the instrument. That's all it says. It doesn't say, you must warm up or else you will injure yourself. It doesn't say that. It says when you do these particular exercises, or these particular kinds of voice use, here are some of the things that it does to the voice. It doesn't tell us what to do with the thing. We get all prescriptive with the data, and we use the data to make us feel better, or somehow to like make us feel like we're in more control, or make us feel like we have more control, perhaps, over the, the singers we're working with and over their outcomes, because they have to do this thing. We use the data to create a formula for singers. So then if they just do that formula, if they just do that spell, if they just, if they just do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, then they will have this outcome. But you know what, friends? We're working with people. We're working with whole people. So that's the first thing. Science is not prescriptive, okay? The data, the research, the data that we get from research, it's not prescriptive. First thing. Second thing is that we actually don't have good science about what is useful for every singer we work with. Look, in order for us to be able to say, if you don't warm up, you will injure yourself, we would have to have a longitudinal, double-blind study of twins who were raised exactly the same way and who sang exactly the same things and ate exactly the same things at exactly the same time, had exactly the same experiences, and one warmed up before they sang and did these very prescribed amount of exercises and the other one did not. That's the only way we would be able to say, the science says, if you don't warm up, you will injure yourself. And then the twin who didn't warm warm up would have to injure themselves while singing, right? Just an easy study like that. That's the study. So we are never going to have research that says if you don't warm up, you will injure yourself. It's not possible to do that research. Imagine how many pairs of twins you'd need for it to be a significant finding. So the research that we do have shows what happens in very few participants, so it's low participants. We do not have longitudinal overtime studies. We do not have, what's it called, the studies where we gather tons and tons of data, like from lots and lots of different studies. We do not have those kinds of studies, those overall studies, those mega ones where they gather in the data. I can't remember what those are. So when folks are like, well, the science says, folks are taking the science out of context. It doesn't matter how many times Teet's a wonderful researcher, wonderful voice researcher, says that here are all of the wonderful things that an SOVT, semi-occluded vocal tract exercise, does. Doesn't matter how many times he says that and how many times he proves that. That's great. That's good information for someone to know so that we can work with singers and singers can use that information to understand that that is a tool to get from one place to another in their voice. But they have to know, first of all, when to use the tool. And they also have to know what it feels like when the tool has been successful. They have to know for themselves. So often what happens with warm-ups, because we, with the best of intentions, are like, I know that everyone is supposed to do a warm-up before they sing or else they might get injured. Friends, we look for all of the warm-ups, we figure out, okay, so we've got to do body, breath, voice, right? That was the way that I used to think about warm-ups and the way that I used to talk to singers about warm-ups, body, breath, voice. Let's get your body moving. Let's get the, let's get some stretching happening. Let's get the stretch along here so that you've got access to this. Like, none of these things are necessarily wrong. But did I ever ask a singer what it felt like for them? No, not once. Did I ever ask singers, hey, or maybe I was like, does it feel like you're stretched out now? And they're like, yes. Do they? Or do they just feel like, I guess I've done it long enough and so now I'm warmed up? So what happens with what we do with the best of intentions is we say, you need to stretch, and here are the best places to stretch for singing. And then you need to do some vocalizing exercises, or you need to do some breathing exercises so that you can get the breathing system going. And then you need to do some phonation, right? And so what does that communicate to singers? First of all, it communicates to singers that our voice use is contingent on doing the things my teacher told me to do as many times as they told me to, and for as long as they told me to. Also, my teacher holds the key, or so-and-so's textbook holds the key, or so-and-so's warm-up routine is the key to making sure that my voice is functioning the way I want it to function, and, well, the way they want it to function, right? Because that is what it boils down to. It is not the way necessarily that I want it to function, but the way that they want it to function. And also, the voice teacher tells me when I'm warmed up. The voice teacher knows when I'm ready to sing. Also, like, how many times have you been in a situation where you're like, are you ready? Do you feel warmed up? And they're like, yep. And you're like, good. Do you know whether they're ready or warmed up? Oh, you don't. You're like, well, I guess they're breathing fine now. Let's go. Do they know? No, they have no idea. So what are we communicating? We're communicating that you have no agency over your own process. Your process is contingent on me telling you whether it was right or not. As in so many things in life, if you are working with someone who tells you that they and they alone have the answer, you need to be real cautious. You need to be real careful about that. As soon as you feel you can only sing, or you sing your best only because you are working with that teacher, as soon as that starts to become a thing, be real careful. Be real careful. That's a red flag. And then what happens when a singer does get injured? Well, then ton of shame around that, right? Because the singer who I'm working with and who I gave the magic formula to, they warmed up every time they sang. They did this, they did that, they did all the things that they had to do, that I told them to do, and then they got injured. Obviously, either they weren't obeying my rules, they're just a bad student. This happens when we impose practice routines. It happens when we impose in any way. When we are in a teacher-centered relationship with the singer we're working with, when we are not able to let go of the responsibility for their learning, when we don't understand how to support their learning journey and everything about their singing is tied up in our identity, our perception of ourselves as a successful teacher. When that student gets injured, what do we say? They didn't do what I told them to do. Well, they just weren't practicing. They were a bad student. They obviously had a bad attitude. They obviously did something I told them not to do, right? We 100% blame it on them. Or we go completely internal on that. We 100% blame it on us. Yeah, toxic either way. We blame it on ourselves. We're like, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? But I gave them all the right exercises and I told them how to do all the things and now I must be the worst teacher on the planet. Yeah. The other thing is the science is applying to one part of the anatomy, one coordination. The science can never research a whole human being. So not only can we not do a double-blind longitudinal study on, warming up, not only can we not get that actual data, it's not possible. But the data that we would get, we cannot control, even if we were to do that, we cannot control for all of the variables, right? So when we are looking at, for example, SOVT exercises and the things that SOVT exercises do, which I love SOVT exercises, they're fantastic, but you know what? I know when I need them. I know when to use them for myself, and I know when to stop using it. I know when I'm at the place where it's done its thing. I know that. I know for myself, for my own body. And the singers I work with, we work to do the same thing, for them to figure out for themselves when they need to do the thing and when they don't. And also how to know when it's been successful. We figure that out. All right. The issue is this with that science, is that we are only looking at what's happening here at the vocal tract. We're looking at subglottal air pressure. We're looking at transglottal air pressure. We're looking at a lot of things. Great. We're looking at a lot of things. But you know what can affect whether or not that straw exercise is useful to the singer, or how much of an effect that might have on the vocal folds, for example, or on the balance between, let's say, pressure and efficiency in the vocal fold level. You know what else can affect that? My mood. Oh, whether or not my stomach hurts, whether I'm in the middle of my menstrual cycle or about to begin my menstrual cycle, whether or not I've had a really crappy day at school, whether or not I am completely anxious right now, how well I'm able to regulate my emotions, whether there is something in the room that is causing my allergies to flare up. Only 1,000 other things can affect whether or not any exercise that science says is going to do XYZ does XYZ. There are 1,000 things because science is only looking at one parameter, right? We're only looking at that one little thing. And humans are a multitude, whole beings, everything. Medication, diet, hydration, rest, outside temperature. Yes, all of these things affect the outcome. All of them, every single one. So it's so individualized. We are never going to have the data that says, if you don't warm up, you will injure yourself. And we will never have the data that says, this is the best exercise for every single person. And this exercise is going to do this thing for every single person. We will never have that data. The data says that in these rarefied occasions, when we're in the lab and we're working with these well-trained singers, for the most part, who can self-regulate and who understand why they're doing these exercises in this research, this is what tends to happen. That's what the data says. The data is agnostic. The data doesn't tell us what to do. The data just gives us information so that we can figure out for ourselves what to do. There's no best way to warm up. Anyone who tells you there is doing their best, but maybe coming more from that diagnose and prescribe side of things, which is certainly present in our pedagogy right now, than from student-led, student-supported, student-centered, whole person embracing, learning supporting, agency supporting pedagogical framework. Those are two different ways of approaching, right? We talk about student-led, student-centered pedagogical framework versus that diagnose and prescribe pedagogical framework. Those are two different things, those two frameworks. And they have two very different outcomes. And they look very different in the studio. The outcome of them looks very different. What were you saying there, Christy? I'd love to know your approach when first inquiring with a student about their goals, getting responses clearly based on these kinds of impressions of how voice lessons go. Yeah. I mean, Christy, as in all things, when we are working with folks who are coming from that system, right, who are coming from this sort of like diagnose and prescribe / this is the way, master apprentice, if you will, this is the way that I've always understood education to be and learning to be, and we are doing this dual work of both recognizing and working to like come out of that in our own selves, right? Like in our own teaching, working to stay in that student-centered pedagogical framework while educating someone who is very much from that framework, right? And used to that framework and may want that framework to begin with, right? So we're just always doing that education. So it's a slow process. It's a slow process. And so in your mind, you're clocking that question, right? And you're saying, I see that this is a question. I don't actually accept the premise, right? I don't accept the premise. And or you are not accepting the premise of my question. You are coming back to it if you have a different understanding of this question. So yeah, it's a slow process of seeding. When they can't give you answers that are based on a student-centered understanding of self, agency-led way, ability to be in the world, we start at the beginning. We start there, and we start to progressively support them to move toward them understanding what they get to do. So that's the thing for me about warm-ups. Not that I don't believe in them, it's that I don't accept the premise of the question, should you warm up or not? That's not relevant. And that's not a question that we necessarily ask or answer in student-led pedagogical framework. That's very much a question based in diagnosis and prescription.